I had just turned 30 when I decided it was time to invest in a place of my own. After years of sharing spaces with friends, family, and sometimes strangers, the idea of having a quiet, personal haven was incredibly appealing. My search led me to a small house in a rural area, not too far from the city but just isolated enough to offer the peace I craved. The price was right, the scenery was beautiful, and the deal was done quicker than I expected. Moving in was a breeze. I didn't have much, just the essentials, so I was settled in no time. The first few days were heavenly. The silence was a stark contrast to the constant noise of my previous living situations. But then, the oddities began. It started with the mail. I'd find letters in my mailbox that weren't mine, addressed to someone I didn't know. Thinking nothing of it, I would just return them to the post office. But then, one evening, as I was cooking dinner, I heard a knock at my front door. Standing there was an older woman, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and hope. She asked if Michael was home. I explained that she must have the wrong house, but she insisted this was Michael's place. I assured her no one named Michael lived here, and after a few moments, she apologized and left. This incident was strange, but I brushed it off as a one-time occurrence. However, as days passed, more people began showing up, all looking for Michael. Each person told a similar story. Michael was a friend, a co-worker, a family member who had suddenly stopped responding to calls and messages. I assured them all that I had bought the house from a real estate agent and had never met anyone named Michael. Things escalated one night when I found a note taped to my door. It was from someone claiming to be Michael's friend, asking him to reach out, that they were worried about him. That note was the turning point, turning my curious annoyance into genuine concern. Who was Michael? What had happened to him? Driven by a mix of curiosity and concern, I decided to investigate. I reached out to the real estate agent, who claimed ignorance about any previous owner named Michael. My next stop was the local police station, where I filed a report and asked if they had any information on a missing person named Michael from my address. The officer took down the details and promised to get back to me. Weeks went by with no word from the police. The visits from people looking for Michael stopped, but the mystery remained unsolved. That was until one late afternoon when I was out tending to my garden. A car pulled up, and a man got out. He introduced himself as detective and asked if we could talk. Inside, over coffee, Detective revealed the shocking truth. The house did belong to a Michael Turner. He had been reported missing over a year ago, and his case had gone cold. The detective explained that Michael's last known address was my house, but after he went missing, the bank foreclosed on the property, and it eventually went on the market. My heart sank as the detective speculated that foul play might have been involved in Michael's disappearance. The revelation haunted me. My home was someone's last known location before they vanished. The detective asked if I had noticed anything unusual about the house, any signs of a struggle, or anything that seemed out of place. I hadn't, but now every creak and groan of the house's settling foundations seemed ominous. I struggled with what to do next. The idea of leaving crossed my mind, but this was my home now. Instead, I decided to learn more about Michael, to keep his memory alive in some way. I reached out to the community, and talking to locals, slowly piecing together the life of the man who once called my house home. As time passed, I made peace with the house's history. I even dedicated a small part of my garden to Michael. The mystery of Michael Turner remains unsolved. But in this house, he is remembered. Not as a shadow or a name in a missing person's report, but as a part of its history. Ever since I got my first job, I dreamed of owning a place I could call my own. After saving up for what felt like forever, I finally bought a house in a small, seemingly peaceful town. It was a fixer-upper, but it sat on a large piece of land, surrounded by dense woods that promised solitude and quiet. Exactly what I wanted. The first few days after moving in were uneventful as I busied myself with renovations. However, it wasn't long before things started to feel off. I'd find my tools misplaced or moved to different parts of the house, despite living alone and being certain of where I'd left them. Initially, I chalked it up to forgetfulness due to the stress of moving and fixing up the place. Then, one evening while painting the living room, I heard a knock at the door. It was a neighbor from a few houses down, introducing himself as Tom. He was friendly, offering advice on the best local stores and tradespeople. But as he spoke, I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was sizing me up, his gaze lingering a bit too long on the layout of my home. We parted ways with a handshake, but his visit left me uneasy. A few nights later, the real unease began. I was woken up by the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom. Thinking it was a burglar, I grabbed the baseball bat I kept for protection and tiptoed to the door. But when I flung it open, there was no one there. The rest of the house was still, and all the doors were locked from the inside. The next day, I installed motion-sensing lights around the property and double-checked all the locks before bed. I hoped it would give me peace of mind, but the feeling of being watched persisted. A week later, I came home from work to find a muddy set of footprints leading from my back door into the woods. I followed them until they disappeared into the dense undergrowth. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I set up trail cameras around the perimeter of my yard, hoping to catch the intruder on film. For days, the cameras captured nothing but wildlife. Then one morning, I reviewed the footage to find a hooded figure standing at the edge of the woods just after midnight, staring directly at the camera before disappearing back into the trees. Heart racing, I realized someone had been on my property, observing me, learning my routines. I reported the incident to the local police, but without a clear image of the person's face or any idea of their intentions, there was little they could do. They suggested it might be a homeless person or a hunter lost on my property, but that didn't explain why the person had come so close to the house or why they seemed so interested in me. Night after night, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I found myself unable to sleep, jumping at every creak and rustle of the wind. My dream of a peaceful home had turned into a constant state of vigilance. Then, one evening, as I was locking up for the night, I found a note pinned to my front door. It was crudely written, but the message was clear. I know you're alone. Panic surged through me. This wasn't a random trespasser. This person had been watching me, learning my patterns, and now they were taunting me. I realized then that my isolation, once my dream, had become my vulnerability. The dense woods that surrounded my home, the distance from my neighbors, had made me an easy target for someone with malicious intent. I couldn't stay there, not with the constant fear and knowing I was being stalked. I packed a bag and left that night, staying with a friend in the city while I figured out my next steps. The police continued to patrol the area, but no one was ever caught, and the visits seemed to stop as suddenly as they had started. I sold the house soon after, unable to shake the feeling of being watched long enough to ever feel safe there again. The dream of my perfect home had turned into a nightmare, a reminder that sometimes solitude can be more dangerous than we realize. So, let me tell you about the new apartment I moved into last summer. It was supposed to be this fresh start, you know? A place to call my own, away from the constant nagging of my parents. It was one of those cheap apartments. Nothing fancy, just 8 units crammed into a building. Now, I didn't have much money, just enough to afford the bare essentials. My futon was my bed, and my small TV was my only source of entertainment. But hey, it was mine, and I was proud of it. The first night was when things started to get weird. I was jolted awake at the crack of dawn by someone banging on my door. An older guy, maybe in his 40s, just standing there like he owned the place. He said he lived in the unit next to mine and wanted to introduce himself. I brushed him off politely and went back to sleep. Fast forward a few days, and I started noticing some odd stuff. Like, one time when I was leaving for groceries, I saw someone peering at me from a window. Gave me the creeps, you know? Turned out to be the same guy from before, just lurking around. But here's where it gets really messed up. One night, as I was about to hit the sack, I noticed this faint red light blinking in the kitchen. At first, I thought it was some glitch or a faulty appliance, but when I investigated, I found a tiny camera hidden behind the fridge. I mean, who would do something like that? Before I could even process it all, guess who showed up again? Yep, Mr. Creepy Neighbor. This time, though, he was acting even weirder. Like, he had this forced smile plastered on his face, but his eyes told a different story. He tried to push his way into my apartment, but I managed to slam the door shut and call the cops. Turns out, the guy had been spying on multiple units in the building. Not just mine, cameras everywhere. And get this, he admitted to it without a second thought, like it was no big deal. Now, I know he probably didn't mean any harm, but the whole thing left me feeling violated, you know? Like, how could someone invade your privacy like that and not even bat an eye? Anyway, I moved out of there as soon as I could. No way was I sticking around after that. But yeah, it's crazy what goes on behind closed doors. Literally. Makes you wonder what other kinds of crazies are out there.